right. Well, welcome everyone. My name is Jennifer Hart. I am the Vice President of Cohortias. We thought we would take you on a tour this afternoon of Mexico, so you can learn a little bit more about the regulations, the pricing, the demographics, and also how we compete with Australia for early phase clinical trials. So thanks for joining. Most of you have been muted, well, all of you have been muted. So if you have questions, if you want a copy of the slides, or you just want to say hey to me, then just at the end of this slide deck, there is a link to email me directly. So, buenas tardes, and I think we should get started. So with that, we'll talk about the clinical trial landscape of Mexico. So right now, the ongoing clinical trials that are being conducted are usually in heart disease, diabetes, and cancer. So as you can imagine, our diseases in Mexico actually mirror what the US has. So that's our top, same as the US, the top indications. So as you can see, there's 40 phase 1 trials, 330 phase 2, 968 phase 3 trials, and 150 phase 4 trials. Just incidentally, diabetes here is probably the #1 killer. It's 1 out of every 2.5 Mexicans has diabetes. A little bit more on the demographics of disease. Like I said, heart disease, diabetes, and cancer. Traumatic injury is workplace accidents and automobile accidents. But you can see it pretty much mirrors the US with stroke, COPD, and kidney diseases. On the right-hand side is your demographics, or the inhabitants in millions, for the next 10 years, well, from 2014 to 2024. And all of this data is found in these links. So if you want to kind of check behind me to make sure I'm not crazy, then you can look there. So let's talk about the regulatory agency. So I get asked this question a lot. What is the main body of the main regulatory group in Mexico? So the Mexican FDA is called COFEPRIS. So what they do, they're the equivalent of the FDA. They're in charge of the national health policy. They regulate all drugs, medical devices, and food. So just like the FDA. So it's a list of your commissioner, your health secretary here. And this was founded in 2001 by the Mexican federal government in an effort to actually bring more drugs and devices and infrastructure into Mexico. So how do COFEPRIS, the Mexican FDA, and FDA actually interact with each other? So if you're considering a trial in Mexico, you want to know how that relationship is going to go. So the relationship between FDA and COFEPRIS. So they work very collaboratively together to ensure the safe imports, so importing things from the FDA or from the United States and exporting to the United States, drugs, produce, products between both the United States and Mexico. And you guys probably knew this, but 80% of Mexico's exports go to the United States, which is a lot of food, actually. I think all of our avocados come from Mexico. So 25% of all medical devices imported into the United States are actually developed in Mexico. That's really, really important to know, because there's been a push in the last 5 years or so to develop more devices, even more in Mexico, to go back to the US, and 10% of the drugs and biologics. So medical devices class 1, 2, and 3 that are cleared and commercialized for sale in the US, that's a really easy process to go through COFEPRIS to get it on the market in Mexico. It's 30 days and they accept your data. So that's really important to know. So if you got questions, if you have a device that you're developing and you want to understand if it gets approved in the US, you can actually put it on the Mexican market relatively easy. Just ask us, we can help you. So what about the new NAFTA? So as you guys know, last year, Trump signed an agreement with the Mexican government to try and understand, or try and actually foster a better relationship for small companies, especially for the US, Canada, and Mexico. And what's really interesting is that this agreement is a result that Canada and Mexico implement significant changes to their IP laws to conform to US standards. So what that means is, as an intellectual property jurisdiction, Mexico offers the same IP rights as North American neighbors, including rights, patents, trademarks, designs, copyrights, and trade secrets. So just stepping back a moment, the U.S. drugs are offered 12 years of exclusivity. So the U.S. Mexico had to step up to that, and now they offer 10 years. So, and they also have new protections against theft of trade secrets, which I know that's important as we are going outside the U.S. to different countries. We need to make sure that our IP is protected. There's another really cool thing about the medical device program here. So once someone in the U.S. has decided to put a manufacturing facility or manufacture a device in Mexico, there's one audit that's now required. It's the Medical Device Single Audit Program. So it's just a way to make sure that device companies have a smoother, easier process of that relationship between COFEPRIS and the FDA. So let's talk about the regulatory process here. Let's talk about how do you get a trial approved. This is for drugs or devices. It's basically a 3-step process. And, any Mexican CRO like us can do this for you. So we take all your documentation and we translate it into Spanish. And then we go to these agencies on behalf of you. So the first step is the IRB. As you guys probably know, same in the US. It's usually a scientific committee, medical doctors, PhDs, people that would understand the science, behind your product. And so that takes about 15 business days, 10 to 15 business days for that to be approved. Then the next step, it goes to WAP, which is what we like to call the pre-FDA. So if COFEPRIS is the FDA here, UAP is the pre-FDA or pre-COFEPRIS. What they did with this was they had so much approvals, or so many approvals they were going through with COFEPRIS, that they created a local body, UAP, which actually reviews the documentation and the paperwork before it goes to COFEPRIS. So by the time it gets to the equivalent of the Mexican FDA, it's a box checking exercise and you're really done. We put 30 business days, but we've seen it as soon as 9 or 10 or even 20. So this is the process. It's a 3-step process. It's pretty outlined. So, the days of the Latin American regulatory landscape being sort of hard and a nightmare are gone, especially in Mexico. So let's talk about how that actually affects a real trial. So if we are looking at a real trial, this would be a drug trial. So different process, as you guys know, for a device trial in the US, and there's also a slightly different process in Mexico for a device trial. But if we're just talking about drug development here, so let's go through an example of a drug. So, you do your in vitro studies, you've got your in vivo rat mouse tox, you've got to do your GLP. Now, of course, this is different if you're doing a biologic. But then you also have to do your GLP dog toxicology. Then the FDA says you can go into phase 1 healthy volunteers for your SAD/MAD study. Then, of course, it's phase 2 and phase 3. A lot of the companies we work with have an inflection point as far as financing between that phase 1 and that phase 2 jump. So it's super important for them to be able to get as soon as possible into patients, if possible. So luckily, COFEPRIS has made this possible in Mexico. So at the beginning, you still have your in vitro study, so your science still needs to be there. Then you need to do your in vivo animal safety study, so a separate safety study. It doesn't have to be GLP. It just needs to be a safety study. And then you need an efficacy study and an animal model. So what then happens is we review it, we have our scientific team review it and let you know if we think that's enough data to go to the agency. And then instead of going into healthy volunteers and wasting $1 million, you can go into patients. So we're doing this now for quite a few U.S. companies. They love this option because, as you can see, the timeline and the cost, you know, time is money, but money is also money. If you can see this, it saves a lot of time, a lot of energy, and a lot of cost. And this is just basically because of the regulations are slightly different. So we are using that to our advantage. And all of our customers are U.S. customers. So what then happens with that data? So does the FDA recognize that data if you don't have an IND? Because COFEPRIS does not require you to have an IND to start a trial. So what happens when you try to take this data back to the US? Well, up here on your right-hand side, you see a little link. So you can go and read all of this guidance documents. There's tons and tons and tons of guidance documents from the FDA. But what we try to do is we try at Cohortias, we make sure that we conduct our studies under GCP FDA regulations. So if we are satisfying the FDA and we're satisfying COFEPRIS, then you can take your drug or product to either market. So that's what the FDA requires, that it has to be conducted under GCPs, it has to be able to be audited and monitored, and the quality system has to meet approval. And luckily we have that. So we welcome you to come down, look at our quality system, and determine for yourself if you think it's equivalent to US. So this is a little bit interesting. A lot of people ask me, well, have any drugs in the US been tested in Mexico? And absolutely, yes. So of the 59 drugs approved last year, which seems like a really low rate for all the drugs that we work on, 13 of them were tested at sites in Mexico, as well as also US and Europe, usually for the phase 3. So usually your phase 3 is US, Europe, and either China or Latin America, and Mexico is included in that. So this country is used to doing clinical trials. It's used to having the FDA review the data. So let's talk about the standard of care a little bit. I get asked this question a lot because people have, sometimes we as Americans have preconceived notions based on things that we've read and heard. So luckily, I'm here to help you out with that. So the standard of care in Latin America, since the 1990s, they've come a long way. So they really, a lot of the countries have universal health coverage already now, which we don't even have. So including Brazil and Chile, some of the countries that we work in. And then Mexico, Costa Rica actually have some of the best national health care insurance. So believe it or not, and we'll go into that in a little bit, but it's actually really, really good. So all of these, and I won't exhaust you with this page, but all of this is found under these references at the bottom. So if you want to read everything, I think it's all in English. No, that one's in Spanish. Never mind. You have to know some good Spanish. All right, this is a busy slide, but I'm going to kind of get through it. Basically, so what is the standard of care like? What is it like to treat patients in Mexico? So first of all, it's usually provided by public institutions, so your public hospitals. We also have private hospitals. So right here in Monterrey, we have a mixture of both. We also have private physicians, and most of the private physicians, I can tell you now, all the KOLs, all the physicians that we do trials with were trained in the US, mostly in Texas for some reason. I guess it's close. So, but every medium to large city has at least one first-rate hospital. So Monterrey, I think, has 3, and this is a city of maybe 2 million people. So insurance is covered partly, so this might help you if you're looking to expand into the Mexican market. Insurance is partly funded by the government, partly funded through the employer, and also they have separate private healthcare organizations. So it's kind of a mixture. It's a 2-3 tiered system that covers everyone. So everyone here, even everyone that's poor gets covered. If you're rich, you're covered. Everyone's covered. So I get asked this question a lot too about standard medical equipment. So your MRIs, your CTs, PET scans, DEXA scans, EEG, even quantitative EEG is available, used widely, and done in trials here. So, you know, don't think if you have an endpoint in your trial that's a functional MRI that we can't do it. That to the next point is the complex neurological and cardiovascular procedures. Can think of 2 instances. One previous study we did, which was a stereotactic neurosurgery. Then that was a clinical trial. And also we've done cardiovascular stent trials. So I want you to kind of open your mind and think about all the possibilities that could be in Mexico. And the reason why it's so efficient here as far as cost is because the procedures and visits are about half the cost. So if you're thinking about clinical trial design and clinical trial cost, this is why, because all of the visits and all the procedures are about half the cost as what you would have in the US. So just give you some pictures because I really like pictures. This is, like I said, you know, Monterrey has 3 or 4 state-of-the-art sites. You see 2 of them here on the left, Zambrano and University Hospital Nuevo Leon. So, and then the one on the right is the Cancer Research Hospital in Mexico City. Just to give you some pictures. Incidentally, the branch on the left, we have a master agreement with. So when you approach me or I approach you about doing an early phase trial, we have already selected this site, have master agreements with them so that we can make sure that this whole process goes a lot smoother. You know the site, it's a great site, and they have lots of capabilities. They've done lots of trials. So it helps us to help you out because we have a single point of contact. We have direct access to the scientific committee, clear and consistent price structure, so it's not different for every time we go, and it's an expedited process. So we set this up on purpose because Tec de Monterrey is, when I came here, they said it's the equivalent of the MIT of Mexico. It's a very, very sophisticated, state-of-the-art academic medical teaching campus. It reminds me a lot of Duke. I was at Duke, and it reminds me a lot of that. So, so we've partnered with them to do a lot of these early phase studies. So this is a really quick slide. I'm not going to go into a ton of detail about this, but you have to know you have to import your product. So if we're going to do clinical trials on your product, we have to import it. And there's no special or funny rules like there are in Canada or the Netherlands or Brazil about importing biologicals. There's really no limit to what you can bring in Mexico. We've seen stem cells, we've seen growth factors, we've seen, you know, all kinds of vaccines. So just think about that as you're going forward. There probably won't be an issue importing anything to Mexico. The process is, though, we would put all of this together for you. You still have to apply to COFEPRIS, but we do that. So all we need for you to know is what your drug is and where it's made, and it needs to be made GMP. Then we can do the rest for you. But just know that that is something you'll need to be able to do. All right, so in my travels, since I've been here for about 1.5 years, talking to U.S. customers about Mexico, the first question I get, other than the quality standard, is, well, how do you compare to Australia? Because a lot of you know that Australia offers a very large and nice tax credit. And they have done a really great job marketing it and getting it out to U.S. customers. So what we thought we would do is actually do a head-to-head comparison with a sort of dummy clinical trial. So let's check this out. So this, and I want to say this is very, very draft. So don't hold me to all of these numbers because it really depends on what we're doing to these patients. So I want to say that first. But in general, I can say these things. So if the trial is a 12-patient Parkinson's study, we're doing some safety, some efficacy. We're just doing the clinical conduct. Bioanalytical is separate. We can also do that in Mexico, so we can get that cost for you. But just the clinical conduct in the U.S., you're looking at anywhere from $1.2 to $1.5 million. Okay, and we actually do have a tax credit for R&D in the U.S. It is 6%. It's a whopping 6%. So you get out with a $1.1 million trial. Australia, similar in cost structure to US, maybe a little less expensive when I've had trials that I've had to cost there. But then you get this huge, 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 huge tax credit. So it drops your price down to almost half. So, which is a really, really attractive option for a lot of US customers. And so hats off to Australia for doing that. Mexico, on the other hand, does not offer a tax credit. I thought they did, and I thought they would, but they don't. They actually offer it for Mexican companies. So right now there is no ex-Mexico option yet. There may be. There may be some talks going on with that. But right now, we, as Cohortias, are eligible for an R&D credit. They want to take their own employees in the country and actually give credits for that. But regardless, because of Mexico's standard of health and their cost structure for healthcare costs, you're going to get about the same amount of cost that you would for Australia, and maybe even a little less. So, with that being said, I've got a couple of Aussie friends on the phone, so don't kill me because I'm going to go into some negative things about this tax credit. I mean, yeah, I have to. So, I'm going to tell you how, and I'm going to be very open about how you get this credit, and then what are the downsides and what things you don't have to do with Mexico. So the stipulations are it must have the purpose of generating new knowledge. So think about that for a second. If you're doing a biosimilar or a generic, would you qualify? Do you need to go through this entire process and still not qualify because you're doing something that's not technically new? Can an outcome be determined from the award? That's usually, that sounds very logical, and you say, okay, yeah, absolutely, it can be determined from the award. But not always, because if you're doing an observational study, there may not be an outcome. So it may not apply. And then the last one is research, or the last two is research must start with a hypothesis and end with an experiment. Well, that's pretty true of any clinical trial, so I'll give them that one. That one's good. And then the last one is you must have under $15 million in global turnover. Most of the smaller companies I talk to actually do have less than $15 million. But once you hit that mark, then you're not eligible for this credit. And I've talked to some global tax experts about this, and they said this credit may not be continued next year. So think about that as you're going forward. If you have a multi-year trial, that could affect your budget significantly. All right, so what are the steps? And I'm not going to go through this in really, really big detail, but you really have to set up an entity. You got to have a bank account. You need to pay for the trial up front. They'll reimburse you the next fiscal year. And then you need to select, they really highly suggest you select a research service provider. And there's only a few CROs that qualify as that. So it actually limits your selection of your CRO. So this is just, we did a survey of all of the friends, family, colleagues, clients that we know. Overall, it was a good experience for them to do the Australian trial. But if there was something closer to home that was affordable, they would definitely do it. And the enrollment was a little bit of an issue because they just don't have the diabetes patient population, the cardiovascular patient population. So think about that too, that could actually extend your trial. All right, so overall takeaways. Mexico is still less expensive than doing this with the Australia tax credit. So there's no paperwork to set up an entity. You don't have to maintain it. The time difference from the US is really hard when it's tomorrow and you're trying to run a very small trial with the only product you have and you're very protective of it. So that's an issue. Like we said, enrollment could be an issue because it has been in the past. The quality is the same and it's actually closer for you to come check it out yourself. So you can get on a plane. We are 200 miles south of Houston. So if you can get to Houston, you can get here in an hour, which is not what you can do. I mean, Australia is a lovely, lovely place, but it is very far. Now, the one good thing that Australia does offer, their timelines, their regulatory timelines are shorter. They're about 4 weeks on average shorter. But if you plan your trial accordingly, you don't really need those 4 weeks anyway. So, and I don't know, it varies. Sometimes it's 2 days to set up an entity. I've heard as much as 30 days to set up an entity there. So you're kind of gambling with that. So anyway, that was the Mexico versus Australia comparison. So I'd like to take you through what we offer for the beta trials small platform here about in Cohortias. So like I said, we're a Mexican CRO and we're specializing in phase 1 early phase trials. So just so you can see where we are, this is a very short video drone tour of Monterrey. This is where our headquarters is. All right, I like that video. It's a really nice video. Okay, let's see if I can get to the next slide. How do I get to the next slide? Oh, there we go. Okay, so this is a little snapshot of our office. I'm in here somewhere. So if you see in the background, some mountains in the background. So I split my time between North Carolina, about 8 months out of the year, and then here in Monterrey, about 3 to 4 months out of the year. And then, of course, I'm traveling in the US. It's a really beautiful place. It's actually the richest city in all of Latin America. So a little bit about us. So we are a full service CRO. So we are like a Quintiles or a PPD or a Par Excel, but we're just based in Monterrey, Mexico. And we're smaller, but we do have the ability to expand to large phase 3 trials. We have 200 sites in Latin America between Argentina, Brazil, Colombia, and Mexico. So like I said, again, on the left-hand side, all your basic CRO services from soup to nuts. So we do everything from protocol design and development with you, which is crucial because the Mexican informed consents are a little different. The Mexican patient population, recruitment, enrollment will work with you on what the protocol should look like for this country. We'll talk about the beta trials platform. We also do several medical device studies, these small pilot studies, first in human. Phase 1 through 3, we're running a couple of large phase 3 studies right now. So we don't only do this small platform, but we really like it. It's where the rubber meets the road as far as innovation goes. This is a little bit about our management team. I am the third person that's not on the slide. I didn't make it to the slide, I guess. But we've got the CEO, Martijn Waller, which is Dutch. So we've got a multinational executive management team. We have the chief medical officer, Dr. Hernandez, and then I'm from the United States. So how are we different? So every CRO says they're different. I guess we're different because we really cater to biotech companies, not only in the scientific piece, but in the financial piece as well. We understand that you've got money sometimes, other times you don't, and so we kind of work around your venture capital schedule. So when you're getting money, so if you say, Jen, I need to pay startup fees, but I can't pay for this until then, we actually work with you. Most CROs do not. They tell you it's 25% up front. Thanks a lot. So we do all the regulatory piece, so you don't have to worry about that. So any country that you go in that we're into, which is Mexico, Colombia, Argentina, Brazil, we do all the regulatory piece for that, so you don't have to worry about it. We have a great peer-to-peer model with our chief medical officer and the KOLs in Latin America. And we actually have head-to-head competition. So if you say to me, Jen, I'd like to see your latest metrics versus a big CRO, which starts with IQ something that I won't name. But if you came to me and said, let me see your metrics for that, we can show you. So let's talk about this beta trials platform. So because, like I told you guys earlier, there are a couple of steps you don't actually have to do for COFEPRIS, we have actually set up part of our manpower and part of our organization to focus on exploiting that for our US customers. So what is it? So what is a beta trial? So it's a small 1 to 2 site trial, depends on how many patients you have. So we've got some trials that are 10 patients that are doing the beta trials. We've got one that's 5. We've got one that's 35. So it just really depends on what you're looking to do in the trial. So we put safety and efficacy endpoints. Of course, your safety is your primary endpoint. Yeah, your safety is your primary endpoint. Right, sorry. But then we actually put secondary endpoints that are efficacy, and we actually put a dose escalation arm in the patient study. So it's really cool, the MAD arm that we do with some of these patient trials. It does go through the 3 regulatory bodies of approval, right, that we talked about earlier, IRB, WAP, and COFEPRIS. It actually was developed with venture capital people that I talked to that said, you know what, Jen, I would love to have a fast way or a faster way to see if this is going to work in patients. So we built it. So it's not only for biotechs, but it's also for venture capital to get out earlier. It's kind of equivalent to your phase 1B. So if you think of phase 1B studies, it would be like that. It's really attractive for riskier exploratory areas. As you guys know, the Alzheimer's space is very tough nowadays. A lot of people don't want to invest in that. But this is the place to try things out in areas that are not being as invested in. Also implantable devices, different things that may or may not be approved by the FDA, but could be approved by COFEPRIS. But with that being said, even though it's riskier, more exploratory, There are multiple stops for DSMB and safety. We care about the patients here, the population here. We're not going to put anyone at risk. So, and we conduct all of our studies under GCP regulations. So what are the requirements? So this is for a drug study. Device is a little bit different, but if you email me if you need a same thing like this for device, just let me know and I'll send it to you. So you can actually throw out your dog toxicology. They do like a 6-month safety preferred in rats or mice. So a 6-month safety time period. It really corresponds to what you're dosing. You want to put your animal study, what you're dosing your human study. So whatever you assume your dose effectiveness is going to be that period of time, you need to have your animal study for that. Your efficacy study in a suitable animal model of disease. If you have a disease animal model, that would be great. All of this is reviewed with the scientific and IRB committee to make sure it can go forward. So you don't have to invest in a clinical trial and then have it be rejected. We'll tell you at the beginning if you have enough information. You do need to have your characterization of your product. You need to know what it is, how it's made, what your metabolites are expected to be, anything like that. So you need to understand where that is. We need to know where it's manufactured because we're going to need to import. The healthy volunteers piece is not necessary. Now, if you already have this, information, of course, the IRB loves more information than less. So the more you can give them, if you've already done your phase 1 and healthy volunteers, that's perfectly fine. But we're just saying going forward, especially in the areas of most unmet need, they are begging for innovation, new studies, early phase stuff in Mexico. All right, so what is the benefit? What's the benefit of doing this? Of course, you guys know this. I mean, if you can skip some time, a little bit of time and a little bit of money, you can actually get your product off the shelf. So, and for venture capital, they can de-risk it early, or you can de-risk it earlier, and it's a fast fail or success. So you can get in and out of this product quicker, which is great. It's better for everyone. And also, if you do not open an IND, so everyone thinks, okay, I have to open an IND. No, you don't. If you do not open an IND and you go do this study in Mexico first, if you then want to go to the Mexican market with this product, you are on the fast track. It's 180 days of approval versus 240 days if you had an IND in the US. So keep that in mind too. We have some customers that are saying, well, forget the US market. I'm going to go to Mexico. I'm going to do this process, put this drug on the Mexican market, get money from the Mexican market for the private healthcare system, and then go back to the US to do that costly process, that costly long process. So one thing we can also talk about is sometimes medicines are not as affordable here and not everybody has access to them. So there's a lot of people wanting to be in trials, calling up doctors, calling our chief medical officer saying, can I be in a trial? I want to be in a trial, which is completely different than the American landscape. Like I said, it's 200 miles south of Houston. And we can also, if you need GMP manufacturing, if you say that's great, but the GMP manufacturing is going to be so expensive, we can find you a partner here as well. So about the therapy feasibility platform, it gives you a window into the efficacy, possibly. I mean, any statistician would shoot me for saying that, but you never know. Sometimes you can see a hint of efficacy in as little as 10 patients. So if you can, I mean, how great would that be to go to your investors and say, oh my gosh, not only did we get safety, but we have a hint of efficacy. Even if you just got safety, that's awesome. So, and then the best thing about this is that for a much less amount of money, you can now inform your later, larger study design. So you will gain lots of information from this small, efficiently designed trial. And then, as you guys know, of course, If you have data, you can get more data and more money. So venture capital people will be more likely to give you more money the more data, especially in patients that you have. And what we try to do is, let's say you have a site or a key opinion leader that you really want to involve in this study. We bring them here. So we've brought people here from Duke, from UCSD, that partners with our key opinion leaders and our principal investigators here. So it's a really great opportunity for the US and Mexico to work on something very innovative together. So how does it all work? So you would be on the left, so sponsors on the left, Cohortias is in the middle, and then you have your vendors and your sites on the right-hand side. So your protocol or your protocol synopsis will come to us, and of course, like I said, we can help you develop that. But then we manage the sites, we select the sites, we audit them, we monitor them, we train them on your protocol. So if it's one site, if it's 18 sites, we do all that. Same thing with the vendors. So if you have bioanalytical vendors, you have translation vendors, we would manage them as well. As you can see, the data is coming back. So that's through your electronic data capture system. You would also have access to, so that's part of the clinical trial. So this is sort of the workflow. So I am really done, I think. I would love to hear your thoughts. If you'd like to know more information about a specific topic, so if I touched on something you really want to know more about, just click on my name and send me a quick note. And we'll do more of these webinars as we learn more information about regulations and things in Mexico. So thank you all for coming, and I will talk to you later.